With the release of Age of Overlord, as well as the new Horus archetype, we're seeing a huge shift in the metagame towards a graveyard format. And that's why in today's video, we're going to be going over how to beat the Horus deck. Now, if you're not familiar with what Horus does, essentially it's a deck that lines their graveyard with their level 8 Horus monsters with cards such as Trade-In, maybe the mill from the deck, and then once they activate their Pharaonic Sarcophagus, each Horus monster can revive itself from their graveyard once per turn. And honestly, this leads to some pretty insane plays. And then from there, they like to start off with cards such as Coach King Giant Trainer, detach 3, draw 3, and burn for 2400 damage. And then they're actually able to then utilize other rank 8 abilities such as Zombie Vampire or even the number 38 Hope Harbinger. So the deck itself is actually quite formidable and something to be looking out for in the current meta game. And then not only do they have the pure version where they use cards such as Trade-In to get the level 8s in the graveyard, but they're actually splashing it with decks such as Tearlaments. So honestly, especially in that non-pure version, that is where we're going to be seeing a lot of trouble with them in the meta game. And then on top of that, even if they are just playing the pure version, the spell card of the Pharaonic Sarcophagus itself will give them a little bit of protection, because then you will only be able to destroy the Horus cards with targeting abilities, and then if you try to battle them, your monster will be destroyed before the damage step. So that's essentially a rundown of what the Horus deck does, but what is the best way to beat the Horus deck? And as always, we're going to be going over ways to beat the Horus deck going first. Some of the best cards to be using going first against the Horus deck, especially if you want to lock them out of the graveyard, is cards such as Royal Prison. Essentially, Royal Prison is a continuous trap card that states neither player can special summon monsters from the graveyard. So obviously, if you get this up on your first turn, your opponent's going to be unable to special summon any of the Horus monsters from the graveyard. But if you're wanting to rely on cards that are not a continuous trap card waiting to be popped, we have cards such as Gravekeeper's Inscription, which has been seeing a lot of hype in the market as well as in usability. And that's because Gravekeeper's Inscription are really good against the Horus matchup, and that's because one of the effects states neither player can special summon monsters from the graveyard. So right then and there, we're going to be locking the Horus deck into the graveyard, keeping them there, and honestly, I think it's fitting considering it is a Gravekeeper card in general. So that is just ways to kind of lock them out of their graveyard. But what are some other cards to be utilizing as well going first against the matchup? And we're seeing cards such as Gozen Match as well as Rivalry of Warlords are extremely strong against that Horus matchup, and that's because each of the Horus monsters are actually a different type as well as a different attribute. So no matter which version you want to play, Gozen or Rivalry, they're actually both extremely good against the deck, as well as cards such as And the Band Played On, locking them into one level 8 monster, or even cards such as Summon Limit, which will keep them at 2 summons per turn, which really kind of keeps them out of the extra deck and into just the standalone monsters. Other cards that are really good at going first against the Horus matchup is anything that honestly banishes all the cards, such as Macrocosmos. We do have Defissure. Then we also have things like Different Dimension Ground, just all cards that if you go first with these against the Horus matchup, make sure that they're banishing their cards before they hit the graveyard, or even with Macro, once they detach altogether or leave the field, it's just gonna banish the Horus cards right then and there. You're gonna just kind of stunt them altogether or prevent them from playing right out of the gates. So all three of those are very good options in the matchup. And then the other way you can kind of start your first turn off is by targeting the Pharaonic Sarcophagus, rather by using Anti-Spell Fragrance from keeping them from activating it altogether, or we're seeing a lot of hype with Unending Nightmare. These are both very good cards to keep their Sarcophagus at bay and from activating. And honestly, Unending Nightmare is seeing an unending amount of hype, and that's because it can just kind of keep the Sarcophagus off the board. And then even if they have multiple copies, by just paying that 1000 life points, you're keeping the Sarcophagus off the board, as well as other really good field spells that a lot of decks are actually playing, and you'll honestly just get a bunch of utility off Unending Nightmare. So obviously it's really easy going against any deck while you go first with Floodgates, but most importantly, what do we use when going second against the Horus deck, as well as where to hand trap the Horus deck at. Well, we actually have quite a few hand traps that are very good against the Horus deck, and the first one needs no introduction. That is Dimension Shifter. If your deck is able to play Shifter, and honestly see the wins flow in. Dimension Shifter, just the card to be playing against the format right now. But if you're unable to do that or want to keep with the normal hand traps, we're actually going to be seeing Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring put in a ton of work against the deck, as well as Drone Lockbird. So Drone Lockbird, you'll mainly want to utilize when they're adding multiple cards. If they're going to be using that trade-in, drawing 2, you want to keep them from adding multiple cards. Maybe draw right then and there, or if they already went into the Giant Trainer and they're detaching to draw 3 cards, you're going to freeze them into that first draw, which is honestly really nice. You keep them from detaching the Horuses, as well as keep them from drawing and burning, so it can kind of stop them in the first play. But I'd like to say Ash Blossom is honestly the hand trap to be going with against that matchup, and that's because in the pure version they're actually utilizing cards like trade-in. They'll discard the Horus, draw 2, and if you freeze them right then and there, there's a chance you're actually preventing them from extending into their turn. Not only that, the actual Glory of Horus allows you to send it, as well as another card from the hand of the graveyard, to add a Pharaonic Sarcophagus from the deck to the hand. So not only are they pitching in another card, but if you actually block the Pharaonic Sarcophagus from getting added right then and there, you're probably going to be freezing them into the current line of play that they only have in their hand, which really honestly isn't going to be that good. So Ash Blossom in those key moments is definitely something you want to keep in mind. And then another hand trap that is really good against the Horus matchup is Nibiru, the Primal Being, and that's because with this matchup, you're definitely going to be summoning more than 5, especially if they start with the Giant Trainer. So being able to Nibiru the board, especially after they've already summoned the Horuses from the graveyard, you're going to probably be stopping their progress right then and there. So definitely be utilizing that in this matchup. We are seeing DD Crow putting in work against the matchup. DD Crow can be hitting out single targets from the Horus deck or even the tier package. These are strong against the matchup, but I would like to say again, if you're able to fit in things such as the Shifter, that will be a lot more bang for your buck unless you're already siding the Crow against other decks. So what are some board breakers that we can be playing against the Horus matchup? And the best board breaker honestly is Evenly Matched. And this is definitely way better than things like Lightning Storm, since Sarcophagus does give them protection, but Evenly Matched will essentially make them choose which single card to banish down, and if they want to revive any of the Horus monsters, they have to then select the Sarcophagus. So definitely be utilizing this against the Horus matchup as a board breaker. But we're actually seeing cards such as Lava Golem be putting in a ton of work this meta. Not only is it good against Horus, it's also good against things like Unchained. And then honestly after that, we're seeing Super Poly return again and again to be putting in that board breaker moment, and it might not seem like it'd be really good against the Horus deck itself, considering that they're all different attributes and types, but when they're splashed with the tier element version, they're gonna be putting out monsters that are really easy targets for Super Poly. Okay, so do keep that in mind. As well as releasing in this set, we're actually seeing SP Little Knight, which will be utilized heavily in the meta game, so being able to Super Poly that up is also going to be instance you're going to be running into against the Horus matchup. And the last 2 cards on today's list are honestly a little bit more of notable mentions, and the first one is Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. That's because if you're going in time against the Horus matchup, it will be really nice to pitch this. Make sure when they're summoning out their Horus monsters, you use this, so then you start gaining an insane amount of life points, because their Horus monsters do get chunky in attack, especially when they start having to go into their exceeds. So don't let them game you with the Giant Trainer. Use the Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood and make sure you win in time against Horus. And then last up on the list is honestly a little bit of out of left field, and that is Evil Swarm Ophion. And with the love we're actually seeing to the hidden arsenal archetypes, it wouldn't surprise me if down the line we do see support for Evil Swarm, but even if we don't, the Ophion itself is honestly an insane card in the matchup against Horus, as well as some of the other decks in the meta currently, and that's because it will actually block players from summoning level 5 or higher monsters as special summon, and then honestly does have a little bit built-in protection when you search the Infestation Pandemic. So some players out there want to have some fun in this format, Ophion might be the way to go. And guys, That is how you beat the Horus deck. And if there's anything that I've missed, there's honestly always a couple cards that fly under the radar. Do comment them down below. We try to actually pin the comments so that you can actually see what other people have commented without having to scroll through the comments. And then as always, if you got anything from the video, do consider sharing the love by hitting that sub button or sharing the video if you've already subbed. But again, guys, as always, stay safe, have yourselves a wonderful night, and suck it, nerds.